map. The sun was setting over the Mediterranean, casting a golden hue over the ancient city of Alexandria. Dr. Layla Hassan, a young historian specializing in ancient civilizations, stood amidst the ruins of the once great Library of Alexandria. Her heart raced as she clutched a fragile piece of parchment, her fingers trembling with excitement. The map she held was unlike anything she had ever seen before, its intricate lines and symbols hinting at a secret buried beneath the very ground she stood on. Layla had discovered the map in a dusty, forgotten corner of the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, the modern library built to honor its ancient predecessor. She had been researching the lost texts of the Library of Alexandria, a lifelong obsession that had driven her academic career. The map had been hidden inside an old, unassuming book on ancient cartography, its pages yellowed with age. At first, she had thought it was just another historical curiosity, but as she examined it more closely, she realized it was something far more significant. The map depicted a series of underground tunnels beneath the ruins of the ancient library, leading to a hidden chamber. The chamber was marked with a symbol that Layla recognized from her studies, a symbol associated with the forbidden knowledge that the ancient librarians had sought to protect. It was said that the Library of Alexandria had housed not only the greatest collection of books in the ancient world, but also secrets that could change the course of history. Layla's mind raced with possibilities. Could this map lead her to the lost scrolls of the library? Scrolls that contained knowledge so powerful, so dangerous, that they had been hidden away from the world? She knew she had to find out. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, Layla carefully folded the map and tucked it into her bag. She would need to gather her equipment and prepare for the journey ahead. But even as she made her way back to her hotel, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, and the distant sound of footsteps echoed in the empty streets. Unbeknownst to Layla, her discovery had not gone unnoticed. A shadowy organization, known only as the Order of the Veil, had been monitoring her every move. The Order had existed for centuries, its members dedicated to protecting the secrets of the ancient world, secrets that could not be allowed to see the light of day. They had been watching Layla for some time, waiting for her to uncover the map. Now that she had, they would stop at nothing to ensure that the truth remained buried. As Layla reached her hotel, she paused at the entrance, glancing over her shoulder. The street was empty, but the feeling of being watched persisted. She shook off the unease and stepped inside, determined to uncover the secrets of the lost library. Little did she know, her journey was about to take a dangerous turn. The descent. The next morning, Layla stood at the edge of the ruins, her backpack filled with tools and supplies. The map had led her to a specific section of the ancient library's remains, where the ground was uneven and littered with broken columns and fragments of stone. According to the map, the entrance to the underground tunnels was hidden beneath a large, unassuming slab of limestone. It was a clever disguise, one that had kept the secret safe for centuries. Layla knelt beside the slab, brushing away the dirt and debris that had accumulated over the years. Her fingers traced the edges of the stone, searching for any sign of a mechanism or hidden latch. After several minutes of careful examination, she found it. A small, almost imperceptible indentation in the stone. She pressed it, and to her astonishment, the slab shifted slightly, revealing a narrow opening just large enough for a person to slip through. Her heart pounded as she peered into the darkness below. The air was cool and damp, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and decay. She pulled a flashlight from her bag and shone it into the opening, revealing a set of ancient stone steps leading down into the depths. The steps were worn smooth by time, and the walls were lined with intricate carvings, symbols and glyphs that seemed to tell a story of their own. Layla took a deep breath and began her descent. The steps were steep, and the air grew colder the further she went. The beam of her flashlight danced across the walls, illuminating the carvings as she passed. They depicted scenes of ancient scholars and librarians, their hands raised in reverence as they guarded something precious. The deeper she went, the more the carvings seemed to come alive, as if they were warning her of the dangers that lay ahead. After what felt like an eternity, the steps finally leveled out, and Layla found herself standing in a narrow tunnel. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with scrolls and manuscripts. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized what she was looking at. This was the lost collection of the Library of Alexandria, preserved for centuries in this hidden chamber. But as she approached the nearest shelf, she noticed something strange. The scrolls were not made of papyrus or parchment, as she had expected. Instead, they were made of a material she couldn't identify, something smooth and almost metallic yet flexible. The writing on them was unlike anything she had ever seen, a series of symbols and patterns that seemed to shift and change as she looked at them. Layla carefully picked up one of the scrolls, her hands trembling with excitement. As she unrolled it, a wave of dizziness washed over her, and she felt as if the very air around her was vibrating with energy. The symbols on the scroll seemed to glow faintly, and she could almost hear a faint hum, as if the scroll itself was alive. She didn't have time to examine it further. A noise from behind her made her freeze, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like the rustling of fabric. She turned, her flashlight illuminating the tunnel behind her. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a shadow moved, and a figure stepped into the light. It was a man, dressed in dark clothing, his face obscured by a hood. In his hand, he held a knife, its blade glinting in the beam of her flashlight. Layla's heart raced as she realized she was not alone. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said, his voice low and menacing. "This knowledge is not for you." Layla took a step back, clutching the scroll tightly. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The man didn't answer. Instead, he lunged at her, his knife slicing through the air. Layla reacted instinctively, ducking to the side and narrowly avoiding the blade. She turned and ran, her flashlight bouncing wildly as she sprinted down the tunnel. The man was close behind her, his footsteps echoing in the narrow space. As she ran, Layla's mind raced. She couldn't let him take the scroll. Whatever was written on it, it was too important to fall into the wrong hands. She needed to find a way out, but the tunnel seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning in a maze of stone and shadow. Finally, she saw a glimmer of light ahead, a small opening in the wall, just large enough for her to squeeze through. Without hesitation, she dove through it, landing hard on the other side. She scrambled to her feet and looked around, realizing she was in another chamber, this one larger and more ornate than the tunnel. The walls were covered in mosaics, depicting scenes of ancient battles and great discoveries. But there was no time to admire the artwork. The man was still behind her, and she could hear him climbing through the opening. Layla ran to the far side of the chamber, where she saw a large stone door. It was covered in the same strange symbols as the scrolls, and in the center was a circular indentation like a keyhole. Desperate, Layla pressed the scroll against the indentation. To her amazement, the symbols on the scroll began to glow brighter, and the door slowly began to open. She slipped through just as the man reached her, the door slamming shut behind her with a loud thud. She was safe for now, but as she looked around the new chamber, she realized she was in even deeper trouble. The room was filled with more scrolls, each one more ancient and mysterious than the last. And in the center of the room was a pedestal, on which rested a single glowing orb. Layla approached the pedestal, her heart pounding. She knew she was standing on the brink of a discovery that could change the world. But she also knew that the man, and whoever he worked for, would stop at nothing to keep her from uncovering the truth. The Orb of Eternity. Layla stood frozen in the chamber, her eyes fixed on the glowing orb resting atop the pedestal. The air around it seemed to shimmer, as if the very fabric of reality was bending to its presence. The scroll she had used to open the door was still clutched in her hand, its symbols now dim but still faintly pulsing with energy. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, the knowledge of countless generations waiting to be unlocked. The chamber itself was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls were lined with more of the strange metallic scrolls, their surfaces etched with symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the light of the orb. The mosaics on the walls depicted scenes of ancient scholars performing rituals, their hands raised toward a glowing object that looked eerily similar to the orb before her. Layla's mind raced as she tried to piece together the story they told. Was this orb the source of the forbidden knowledge the Library of Alexandria had sought to protect? And if so, what did it do? She stepped closer to the pedestal, her flashlight casting long shadows across the room. The orb was about the size of a grapefruit, its surface smooth and translucent, with a faint, swirling light emanating from within. As she reached out to touch it, a voice echoed in her mind, a voice that was not her own. You have come far, seeker of truth, but knowledge comes at a price. Layla jerked her hand back, her heart pounding. The voice was ancient, filled with a wisdom that seemed to transcend time. She looked around the chamber, but there was no one there. The voice had come from within her own mind. Who are you? She whispered, her voice trembling. I am the guardian of this place, the keeper of the Orb of Eternity. The knowledge you seek is not for the faint of heart. To wield it is to risk everything. Layla swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had always been driven by a thirst for knowledge, a desire to uncover the secrets of the past. But now, standing before the orb, she felt a deep sense of unease. What was this thing? And why had it been hidden away for so long? Before she could decide what to do, a loud crash echoed through the chamber. The stone door she had come through began to shake, dust and debris falling from the ceiling as something, or someone, pounded on the other side. The man from the tunnel was trying to break through. Panic surged through Layla. She didn't have much time. She glanced back at the orb, then at the scroll in her hand. The symbols on the scroll seemed to be reacting to the orb, glowing brighter as she held them closer. An idea began to form in her mind. If the scroll was the key to opening the door, perhaps it could also unlock the secrets of the orb. She unrolled it again, holding it up to the light of the orb. The symbols on the scroll began to shift and rearrange themselves, forming a new pattern. A pattern that seemed to tell a story. As Layla studied the symbols, the voice in her mind spoke again. The Orb of Eternity holds the knowledge of the ages, the power to shape reality itself. But to wield it, you must first prove your worth. How? Layla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The trials are threefold. The first is the trial of wisdom. Answer this. What is the greatest danger to knowledge? Layla frowned, her mind racing. The greatest danger to knowledge? She thought of the Library of Alexandria destroyed by fire and war. She thought of the countless books and scrolls lost to time, their secrets forgotten. But none of that felt like the right answer. Then it hit her. Fear, she said, her voice steady. Fear is the greatest danger to knowledge. Fear of the unknown, fear of change, fear of the truth. For a moment there was silence. Then the voice spoke again. You have passed the first trial. The second is the trial of courage. To proceed, you must face your deepest fear. Before Layla could respond, the chamber began to change. The walls seemed to dissolve, replaced by a swirling void of darkness. She felt herself falling, tumbling through space and time, until she landed in a place that was both familiar and terrifying. She was back in the ruins of the Library of Alexandria, but it was no longer in ruins. The library was whole, its grand halls filled with scholars and scribes. But something was wrong. The air was thick with smoke, and the sound of distant screams echoed through the halls. Layla realized she was reliving the library's destruction. She ran through the halls, her heart pounding as flames began to consume the shelves of scrolls and books. She could feel the heat on her skin, the acrid smoke filling her lungs. But she couldn't stop. She had to save the knowledge, had to protect it from being lost forever. As she reached the central chamber, she saw a group of scholars gathered around a large, ornate chest. They were frantically trying to open it, their faces filled with desperation. Layla recognized the chest. It was the same one depicted in the mosaics in the hidden chamber. We have to get it out of here, one of the scholars shouted. If the fire reaches it, all will be lost. Layla rushed to help them, but as she reached the chest, the scene shifted again. She was back in the hidden chamber, standing before the Orb of Eternity. The voice spoke once more. You have faced your fear and proven your courage. The final trial is the trial of sacrifice. To wield the orb, you must be willing to give up what you hold most dear. Layla's breath caught in her throat. What did she hold most dear? Her career? Her reputation? Her life? She thought of her family, her friends, the life she had built. But deep down, she knew the answer. Knowledge, she said, her voice firm. I would give up everything for the sake of knowledge. The orb began to glow brighter, its light filling the chamber. The voice spoke one final time. You have proven yourself worthy. The Orb of Eternity is yours to wield. But remember, with great power comes great responsibility. Use it wisely. The light from the orb enveloped her, and for a moment, Layla felt as if she was floating, her mind filled with visions of the past, present, and future. She saw the rise and fall of civilizations, the discoveries of great minds, the secrets of the universe laid bare before her. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, and Layla found herself back in the chamber, the orb resting in her hands. She could feel its power, a hum of energy that seemed to resonate with her very soul. But her moment of triumph was short-lived. The stone door burst open, and the man from the tunnel stepped through, his knife still in hand. His eyes fell on the orb, and a look of greed crossed his face. Give it to me, he demanded, his voice cold and menacing. Layla tightened her grip on the orb, her mind racing. She had the power of the Orb of Eternity, but she had no idea how to use it. And even if she did, she wasn't sure she was ready to wield it. The man took a step closer, his eyes never leaving the orb. Her mind was still reeling from what she had seen and experienced in the hidden chamber. The orb, the trials, the voice, it was all too much to process. And yet, she couldn't stop. She had to keep moving. The man in the chamber had been a warning, a sign that the Order of the Veil was closer than she had realized. She didn't know who they were or how many of them there were, but she knew they would come for her. She had something they wanted, something they would kill to possess. Her first priority was to get somewhere safe. She needed time to think, to figure out what to do next. She couldn't go back to her hotel, it was too obvious, too exposed. Instead, she made her way to the home of an old friend, Dr. Karim Farouk, an archaeologist who had worked with her on several digs in the past. Karim was one of the few people she trusted completely. When she arrived at his apartment, Karim opened the door with a look of surprise. Layla, what are you doing here? You look like you've seen a ghost. I need your help, she said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. I found something incredible, but there are people after me. Karim's expression shifted from surprise to concern. What are you talking about? What have you found? Layla hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out the Orb of Eternity. The moment it was exposed, the room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with an almost electric energy. Karim's eyes widened as he stared at the orb, his face a mixture of awe and fear. What is that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It's called the Orb of Eternity, Layla said. I found it in a hidden chamber beneath the Library of Alexandria. It's more than just an artifact, Karim. It's a source of power, knowledge, and there's an organization, the Order of the Veil, that will do anything to get it. Karim took a step back, running a hand through his hair. This is insane. Do you realize what you're saying? If this thing is real, if it has the kind of power you're talking about, it could change everything. I know, Layla said. That's why I need your help. I don't know what to do with it, but I can't let the Order get their hands on it. Karim was silent for a moment, then nodded. All right, let's figure this out. But first, we need to make sure you're safe. Stay here. I'll make some calls. See if I can find a place for you to lay low. As Karim moved to his desk and began making calls, Layla sat down on the couch, the orb resting in her lap. She could still feel its energy, a low hum that seemed to resonate with her very soul. She thought back to the trials she had faced in the chamber, the trial of wisdom, the trial of courage, the trial of sacrifice. The voice had told her she was worthy, but what did that mean? What was she supposed to do with this power? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Kareem's voice. "Layla, I found a place. It's a safe house owned by a friend of mine. It's remote, off the grid. You'll be safe there." Layla nodded, relief washing over her. "Thank you, Kareem. I don't know what I'd do without you." Kareem gave her a small smile. "Just promise me one thing. Be careful. Whatever this thing is, it's dangerous. And if the Order is as powerful as you say, they won't stop until they have it." The safe house was a small, secluded cabin in the desert, miles from the nearest town. Kareem had arranged for a trusted driver to take her there, and by nightfall, Layla was alone, the orb resting on the table in front of her. The cabin was sparsely furnished, but it had everything she needed: food, water, and a secure place to hide. As she sat there, staring at the orb, she felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time since she had discovered the map, she had a moment to breathe, to think. She pulled out the scroll she had found in the chamber and unrolled it, studying the symbols once more. They seemed to shift and change as she looked at them, as if they were alive. She remembered the voice in the chamber, the trials she had faced. The orb had chosen her, but why? What was she supposed to do with it? She realized that the orb was warning her, showing her what was coming. The Order was closing in. The next morning, Layla was awakened by the sound of a car approaching the cabin. She jumped to her feet, her heart racing. Had the Order found her already? She grabbed the orb and the scroll, her mind racing as she tried to think of a way out. But when she looked out the window, she saw Kareem stepping out of the car. Relief washed over her, and she opened the door to let him in. "Kareem, what are you doing here?" she asked. "I came to check on you," he said, his expression serious. "I've been doing some digging, and I think I've found out more about the Order of the Veil." Layla's eyes widened. "What did you find?" Kareem hesitated, then said, "They're not just some secret society, Layla. They've been around for centuries, protecting the secrets of the ancient world. But they're not just protectors, they're manipulators. They've been shaping history, controlling the flow of knowledge to maintain their power." Layla felt a chill run down her spine. "So they're not just after the orb. They're after me." Kareem nodded. "They know you have it, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it back." Layla's mind raced. She had to act fast. She couldn't stay here. It was only a matter of time before the Order found her. She needed to find a way to use the orb, to unlock its power before it was too late. "Kareem, I need your help," she said. "I need to understand this thing. I need to know how to use it." Kareem looked at her, his expression a mixture of fear and determination. "All right, but we have to be careful. If the Order finds us—" "I know," Layla said, "but we don't have a choice. This is bigger than us, Kareem. This is about the fate of the world." As the two of them worked together, studying the orb and the scroll, Layla began to feel a sense of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. With Kareem's help, she might just have a chance. But even as she focused on the task at hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The Order of the Veil was out there, and they were coming for her. And when they did, she would be ready. The final stand, the desert night was eerily silent. The only sound the faint rustle of wind against the cabin's windows. Layla and Kareem sat at the small wooden table, the Orb of Eternity glowing softly between them. Hours of study had yielded some progress. Layla had learned to channel the orb's energy, using it to reveal fragments of ancient knowledge. But the deeper she delved, the more she realized how little she truly understood. The orb was a vast, incomprehensible force, and its power was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Kareem leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "This is beyond anything I've ever seen. The symbols on the scroll, the way the orb responds to you, it's like it's alive." Layla nodded, her eyes never leaving the orb. "It's more than just a tool. It's a gateway to knowledge, to power, to things we can't even imagine. But I still don't know how to control it fully. And if the Order gets here before I figure it out..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The weight of what was at stake hung heavy in the air. Kareem stood and walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. We need a plan. If they come, we can't just sit here and wait for them. Layla's mind raced. She had been so focused on understanding the orb that she hadn't thought about how to defend herself. The orb had protected her once, but she couldn't rely on it alone. She needed a way to fight back. What if we use the orb against them? She said suddenly. If I can learn to control it, maybe I can stop them. Kareem turned to her, his expression skeptical. Layla, you've only just started to understand how it works. If you try to use it as a weapon, you could end up hurting yourself or worse. I don't have a choice, Layla said, her voice firm. If they get the orb, they'll use it to control the world. I can't let that happen. Before Kareem could respond, a loud crash echoed from outside. Layla jumped to her feet, her heart pounding. She grabbed the orb and the scroll, her eyes darting to the door. They're here, Kareem said, his voice tense. We need to move. Now. Layla nodded, shoving the scroll into her bag and clutching the orb tightly. Kareem grabbed a flashlight and led her to the back of the cabin, where a hidden door led to a small underground cellar. It wasn't much, but it was the only place they could hide. As they descended the narrow stairs, the sound of footsteps and voices grew louder above them. The Order had found the cabin. Stay quiet, Kareem whispered, his voice barely audible. Maybe they'll think we're not here. Layla nodded, her hands trembling as she held the orb. She could feel its energy pulsing in her hands, a steady rhythm that seemed to match her heartbeat. She closed her eyes, trying to focus, to calm her mind. If she could just tap into its power, maybe she could protect them. But the moment of calm was shattered by the sound of the cellar door being ripped open. A beam of light pierced the darkness, and a voice called out, "We know you're down there. Come out and we might let you live." Layla's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Kareem, who shook his head silently. They couldn't give up. Not now. The footsteps grew closer, and Layla knew they were out of time. She tightened her grip on the orb and stepped out of the shadows, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I'm here," she said, "but you're not taking the orb." The man who had spoken, a tall, imposing figure in a dark suit, smirked. "You think you can stop us? You're just a historian. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Layla didn't respond. Instead, she focused on the orb, letting its energy flow through her. The symbols on the scroll in her bag began to glow, and the air around her seemed to shimmer. She could feel the power building, a force beyond anything she had ever known. The man's smirk faded as he realized what was happening. "Stop her!" he shouted, but it was too late. Layla raised the orb, and a burst of light erupted from it, engulfing the room. The members of the Order were thrown back, their bodies slamming against the walls. The cellar shook, dust and debris raining down from the ceiling. When the light faded, the room was silent. The members of the Order lay unconscious, their weapons scattered across the floor. Layla stood in the center of the room, the orb glowing faintly in her hands. Kareem emerged from the shadows, his eyes wide with shock. "Layla, what did you do?" I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. I let the orb guide me." Kareem stared at her, then at the unconscious figures around them. "We need to get out of here. They won't stay down for long." Layla nodded, her mind still reeling from what had just happened. She had wielded the orb's power, but at what cost? She could feel its energy coursing through her, a constant hum that seemed to grow stronger with every passing moment. They left the cabin behind, driving through the desert under the cover of night. Layla held the orb in her lap, her mind racing. She had stopped the Order for now, but she knew they would come for her again, and next time they would be ready. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Layla made a decision. She couldn't keep running. She had to face the truth. The orb was too powerful to be hidden away, too dangerous to be left in the hands of anyone, including herself. "Kareem," she said, her voice steady. "I need to destroy it." Kareem glanced at her, his expression a mixture of surprise and relief. "Are you sure? This thing, it's the greatest discovery of our time. The knowledge it holds is too dangerous. Layla interrupted. The Order will never stop coming for it. And if they get it, they'll use it to control the world. I can't let that happen. Kareem was silent for a moment, then nodded. All right, but how do we destroy it? Layla looked down at the orb, its light pulsing softly. I think it has to be me. The orb chose me. Maybe it's my responsibility to end this. Kareem pulled the car to a stop at the edge of a vast canyon. The sun was rising, casting a golden light over the landscape. Layla stepped out of the car, the orb in her hands. She walked to the edge of the canyon, the wind whipping through her hair. She closed her eyes, focusing on the orb's energy. She could feel its power, its connection to her. And she could feel something else. A sense of peace, as if the orb understood what she was about to do. I'm sorry, she whispered, but this is the only way. With a deep breath, she raised the orb above her head and threw it into the canyon. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a brilliant light erupted from the depths, illuminating the sky. The ground shook, and a wave of energy swept over her, knocking her to her knees. When the light faded, the orb was gone. The canyon was silent once more. Layla sat on the edge of the canyon, staring out at the horizon. Kareem joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You did the right thing, he said softly. Layla nodded, tears streaming down her face. I hope so, but the knowledge, it's gone forever. Maybe, Kareem said, or maybe it's just waiting for the right person to find it again. Layla smiled faintly, the weight of the orb's power finally lifting from her shoulders. She had faced the Order, wielded the orb's power, and made the ultimate sacrifice. The lost Library of Alexandria's secret was safe once more, buried in the depths of the canyon. But as she stood and turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that her journey wasn't over. The orb was gone, but its legacy would live on. And somewhere, out there in the world, the Order of the Veil was still waiting. The fight for knowledge, for truth, for the future of humanity, it was far from over. And Layla would be ready,